Careful, Claire. This floor is for private clients, not women begging for mercy. Ethan Caldwell said it with a smile, the kind of smooth, practiced smile that made cruelty sound like concern. The words slipped across the marble lobby of Caldwell Meridian Bank and landed in the silence like a dropped glass. For half a second, even the soft piano music seemed to thin out. Claire Whitmore stood near the private elevator with a worn leather folder pressed against her ribs, her ivory wool coat buttoned neatly to her throat, her pale hair pinned low at the nape of her neck. Outside, Manhattan was wrapped in a cold November drizzle, yellow taxis blurring past the tall windows in streaks of light. But inside the bank, everything was polished, warm, and expensive. Brass lamps glowed over velvet chairs. Fresh coffee steamed beside crystal water glasses. Men in charcoal suits spoke in low voices as if money itself might be offended by volume. Ethan belonged to that sound, or at least he believed he did. He stood 10 feet away with Vanessa Reed tucked against his arm, her diamond bracelet flashing each time she adjusted the sleeve of her white coat. Behind them waited 2 business partners and a junior banker holding a tablet, all pretending not to listen while listening to every word. Ethan had come to this floor to ask for more time, though no one in the lobby was supposed to know that. His company's harbor redevelopment project was bleeding cash behind its glossy renderings and confident press releases. 3 towers, 12 acres, for $100 million promised to investors, and not enough liquidity to survive another quarter. But Ethan still wore a navy suit cut within an inch of perfection, still wore the watch Claire remembered from their marriage, still carried himself like the room had been built around him. Then he saw her, and the old performance sharpened into something colder. "I almost didn't recognize you," he said, letting his eyes move over her simple coat, her unbranded handbag, the faint rain on her shoes. "You look practical." Vanessa's mouth curved. Claire did not answer. She only shifted the folder slightly under her arm, her fingers calm, against the cracked brown leather. That bothered him more than tears would have. 5 years ago, Ethan could turn her whole body into an apology with one quiet remark at dinner, one sigh over a credit card statement, one little laugh when she asked a question about their accounts. "Too emotional for finance," he used to say, kissing her forehead as if the insult were affection. Now she simply looked at him, and he felt, for one brief flicker, like a man speaking too loudly in a church. So he raised his voice. "Vanessa, this is Claire," he said, turning half toward the woman beside him. "My ex-wife. She used to hate places like this. Too many numbers." One of the partners gave a polite chuckle. Vanessa tilted her head with delicate pity. "Oh," she said, "how nice that you're still getting out." Claire's expression did not change, but something in her eyes cooled. She had learned, after leaving Ethan, that humiliation needed an audience to breathe. Deny it, and it argued. Fight it, and it fed. Let it stand in the open long enough, and sometimes it revealed the person who had brought it there. Ethan mistook her silence for weakness, as he always had. "Don't worry," he continued, slipping one hand into his pocket. "I'm sure someone downstairs can help with whatever account issue you're having. This level is usually reserved for private banking clients." He smiled wider, pleased with the softness of the blade. Not exactly the overdraft desk. The junior banker's eyes dropped to his tablet. Vanessa laughed under her breath. A woman near the coffee station turned away too quickly. Claire heard all of it, the tiny sounds people made when they chose comfort over decency. She had once mistaken those sounds for judgment. Now they were only weather. She took one slow breath, tasting the faint bitterness of espresso in the air. The elevator behind Ethan chimed, but he did not notice. He was still watching her, waiting for the crack, the blush, the tremor that would prove the story he had told everyone was true. That Claire Whitmore had fallen. That without his name, his money, his world, she had become small enough to mock in public. Instead, she glanced toward the opening. Elevator doors. A woman in a slate gray suit stepped out with 2 senior bank officers behind her. Margaret Sloan, director of private banking, moved with the quiet authority of someone who never needed to hurry because rooms waited for her. She saw Ethan first and gave him the brief professional nod reserved for difficult clients. Then her gaze found Claire. Her face changed at once, not dramatically, not enough for the careless to understand, but enough for every trained person in that lobby to feel the air shift. Margaret walked past Ethan without slowing. Past Vanessa. past the partners, straight to Claire. And before Ethan could finish smiling, the most powerful woman on that floor inclined her head and said, "Mrs. Whitmore, forgive the delay. The executive board is ready for you." Margaret Sloane's voice did not rise, yet it carried farther than Ethan's insult ever had. The private banking lobby seemed to draw one long breath and hold it. Claire gave a small nod, polite and composed, as if she had expected nothing less, while Ethan stood behind Margaret with his mouth slightly open, the easy arrogance draining from his face in slow degrees. Vanessa looked from Claire's simple coat to Margaret's deferential posture, searching for a joke no one else had heard. There was no joke. There was only the soft click of Margaret's pen against her leather portfolio, and the sudden, uncomfortable knowledge that the woman Ethan had mocked was not lost, not desperate, and certainly not on the wrong floor. "Mrs. Whitmore," Margaret continued, "Mr. Bennett has already arrived. We moved the meeting to the glass conference room, as requested." At the mention of Noah Bennett, Claire's fingers tightened once around the old folder. Not from fear, from memory. 5 years ago, that same folder had held divorce papers, bank statements she had not understood, and a settlement Ethan's attorneys had called generous while looking at her as though generosity were something she should kneel for. Back then, she had sat at the far end of a polished table while Ethan's legal team explained her own life to her. They spoke of marital assets, discretionary spending, household dependency, and lifestyle adjustment. They made her sound like a decorative mistake. Ethan had watched quietly, clean-shaven and beautifully dressed, his hands folded in front of him, letting other people do the cutting. When she asked about the accounts he had kept separate, he sighed as if she had embarrassed them both. Claire never cared about numbers, he told the room. She cared about comfort. The word had followed her out of that marriage like smoke. Comfort. It was the label he put on every sacrifice she had made, every dinner she hosted, every client wife she remembered by name, every silent hour she spent making his world look effortless. After the divorce, the city repeated his version because it was easier than asking questions. She had been a wife who spent too much, a woman who had lost her place, a soft thing unprepared for real life. For a while, Claire almost believed it. She moved into a small one-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side where the radiator hissed all night and the kitchen window faced a brick wall. She sold jewelry she no longer wanted and kept only her grandmother's pearl studs, not because they were valuable, but because they had belonged to the one woman who had ever told her to keep something in her own name. Then came the envelope from her grandmother's estate, overlooked during the divorce because it was modest, old, and unconnected to Ethan. It was not a fortune. Not then. It was a beginning. Claire used it quietly. She took finance classes online at night. She learned to read balance sheets the way other people read weather. She studied debt structures, property liens, zoning maps, and market cycles until the vocabulary that once humiliated her became a language she could speak without trembling. Noah Bennett entered her life through a community investment seminar in Brooklyn, a patient financial attorney with silver-framed glasses and a voice that never condescended. He did not rescue her. He handed her documents and taught her where to look. The first investment was small, a distressed brownstone restoration fund in Queens. Then came a clean energy storage startup in New Jersey. Then a quiet partnership in affordable housing. Conversions outside Boston. She did not post photographs. She did not attend galas. She did not correct gossip. Her money grew in silence, like roots under winter soil. And now, standing inside Caldwell Meridian Bank, Claire could feel the entire distance between that frightened woman and this moment. Margaret turned toward the glass conference room, and Claire followed. Ethan, still pale beneath his careful tan, took one step after them. "Margaret," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded too dry. "There must be some confusion. Claire is here for the board meeting." Margaret paused with her hand on the door handle. Her expression remained courteous, which somehow made it worse. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell. Mrs. Whitmore is central to the discussion." The glass door opened. Inside, 6 executives sat around a long table beneath a screen glowing with the name of Ethan's failing development. Caldwell Harbor Redevelopment Loan Package. Below it, in clean black lettering, was a line that made the last color leave Ethan's face. Potential acquisition party, Claire Whitmore Holdings. The words on the screen did not shout, yet they silenced every person in the room. Potential acquisition party, Claire Whitmore Holdings. Ethan stared at the line as though the letters might rearrange themselves into something less impossible. For years, he had treated Claire's name like a closed account, something filed away, settled, and no longer active. Now it glowed at the center of the conference room, where his own company's future was being measured, priced, and quietly removed from his hands. Claire stepped inside without hurry. Noah Bennett rose from the far side of the table, buttoning his charcoal jacket with calm precision. He gave her the kind of nod that belonged to equals, not saviors. "Claire," he said warmly, "the revised documents are ready." She thanked him and took the seat Margaret indicated near the head of the table. Ethan remained by the door until Vanessa touched his sleeve, a nervous little gesture that seemed to wake him. He entered with the stiff smile of a man walking into a room that no longer recognized his authority. The executives did not offer him sympathy. They offered him chairs, water, and printed numbers. That was worse. Margaret began with a voice as smooth as the polished table. Caldwell Development had missed 2 liquidity benchmarks. Harbor Redevelopment was 18 months behind schedule. Private investor confidence had weakened. Additional collateral was insufficient. Each sentence was professional, bloodless, and devastating. Ethan tried to interrupt twice. Once with a joke about temporary market pressure and once with a polished assurance that his family name still carried weight in New York real estate. Neither landed. Numbers had no memory of dinner parties. Debt did not care who his grandfather had been. Claire listened without expression, her hands folded beside the folder that had once carried the evidence of her smallness and now carried the terms of his rescue. She remembered a night in their old penthouse when she had asked why one of his contractors had placed a lien notice in the mail. Ethan had laughed softly, not unkindly enough for anyone else to notice, but sharply enough for her to feel it for days. "Leave the grown-up problems to me," he had said, sliding the envelope out of her hand. She had believed him then. That was the part that still stung, not his arrogance, but her own trained obedience to it. Margaret turned a page. "Mrs. Whitmore's firm is prepared to purchase a significant portion of the Caldwell Harbor debt, subject to revised risk adjustments." Ethan leaned forward, color returning to his face in a rush of desperation disguised as charm. "Claire," he said, using the old softness, the voice he once saved for apologies that changed nothing. "Come on. We were married. You know how hard I worked for this." The room seemed to narrow around her. Vanessa looked down at the table. Noah did not move. Claire lifted her eyes to Ethan, and for the first time that morning, he saw not the woman he had left, not the woman he had described to others, but someone who had survived the cost of understanding him. "I know exactly how hard you worked to make people believe I had nothing to do with any of it," she said. Her voice was quiet enough that everyone had to listen. Ethan swallowed. "That was a long time ago." Claire opened the folder and removed one page. "No," she said. "That was this morning." No one smiled. No one needed to. She signed the document with a black fountain pen, the movement clean and final. Then she slid it toward Margaret. "Adjust the offer," Claire said. "The exposure is higher than I expected." Ethan understood before anyone explained it. His insult in the lobby had not ruined her composure. It had changed the price of his pride. The empire he had used to define himself was still standing, but only because the woman he had dismissed was deciding whether it deserved another season. His partners avoided his eyes. Vanessa's hand slipped from his sleeve. The watch on his wrist ticked once, twice, impossibly loud in the quiet room. "You planned this," he whispered. Claire stood, gathering her folder. Outside the glass walls, the private banking floor continued as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Coffee poured. Phones vibrated. Rain traced silver lines down the windows. She looked at Ethan one last time, not with hatred, not even triumph, but with the calm distance of someone who had finally returned a borrowed burden. "No, Ethan," she said. "You did. I only learned how to read the numbers." Then she walked out with Noah beside her and Margaret a half step behind, leaving Ethan seated beneath the bright screen of his own unraveling. In the lobby, the woman who had turned away earlier now watched Claire with quiet recognition. The junior banker straightened as she passed. The elevator doors opened, reflecting her ivory coat, her steady face, and the folder beneath her arm. For a moment, Claire saw the ghost of the woman who had once trembled over bank statements she had been told not to understand. Then the doors closed, and the ghost was gone. Outside, the drizzle had softened into the first pale flecks of snow. Noah opened the car door at the curb, but Claire paused before stepping in. The city moved around her in yellow lights and wet pavement, indifferent and alive. "Are you all right?" he asked. Claire looked back at the bank's golden windows, not searching for Ethan, not waiting for an apology, not needing the room to clap. For her, a small breath left her, almost a laugh, almost a release. "I am free," she said. And for the first time in years, the word did not sound like something she was trying to become. It sounded like something already true. By the time Claire's car pulled away from Caldwell Meridian Bank, Ethan was still sitting in the glass conference room with the afterimage of her signature burning behind his eyes. The meeting continued around him in careful, professional tones, but the language had changed. Before Claire walked in, the discussion had been about extensions, relationships, and confidence. After she left, it became about exposure, collateral, and consequences. Margaret Sloan did not gloat. That was not her style. She simply turned to the next page and explained that any restructuring would require full disclosure of pending liabilities, including unpaid contractor balances, delayed municipal filings, and the personal guarantees Ethan had hoped no one would mention in front of his partners. Each item landed softly, like snow on a roof already too heavy to bear. Across the table, Ethan's chief financial officer removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. One partner stared at the screen as if he were calculating how quickly loyalty could be converted into distance. Vanessa sat very still, her pale coat folded across her lap, her diamond bracelet suddenly too bright beneath the conference room lights. Ethan felt the heat rise under his collar. He wanted to blame Claire, to turn her into the villain of this room the way he had done so easily in dining rooms, charity circles, and private conversations where no one ever asked for evidence. But the numbers would not cooperate. The numbers were older than this morning. The numbers had been waiting for him. "We can discuss alternative sources of capital," he said, though his voice sounded thinner than he intended. Margaret looked at him with the same calm she had given Claire, but without the warmth. "You are welcome to present them, Mr. Caldwell. At this stage, however, the bank must prioritize the strongest offer on the table." The strongest offer. Ethan almost laughed. Once that phrase would have described him. His name opened doors at private clubs, investment dinners, board retreats in Aspen, and summer homes along the Hamptons coastline. He had spent his adult life believing reputation was a kind of currency that never expired. Claire had believed it too, once. That had been useful. She had smiled beside him while he gathered admiration like interest, while he spent her grace as if it belonged to him. Now the room wanted proof, and proof had always been his least favorite language. The meeting ended without ending. No one slammed a folder, no one raised a voice, no one said ruin out loud. They simply agreed to reconvene in 72 hours after an updated review of the loan package. That was how powerful institutions delivered bad news. They wrapped it in calendars. Ethan stood too quickly, bumping the edge of the table with his hand, then pretending he had meant to adjust his cuff. Vanessa followed him into the hallway, her heels clicking against the marble with a nervous rhythm. For a few steps, neither of them spoke. The private banking lobby looked exactly as it had before, golden and serene, which made the humiliation feel even more precise. People were still drinking coffee. Employees were still smiling. The world had not cracked open. Only his version of it had. Near the elevator, Vanessa stopped. "You told me she was broke," she said. The words were quiet, but not gentle. Ethan kept his eyes on the elevator doors. She was. Vanessa's reflection stared back at him from the polished brass, beautiful and uncertain. "No, you needed her to be." That landed closer than he liked. He turned, ready with an answer, but found none that could survive the morning. For the first time since he had met her, Vanessa looked at him without admiration doing the work for her. She saw the perfect suit, the expensive watch, the controlled hair, the famous last name, and beneath all of it, the frightened arithmetic of a man who had mistaken performance for power. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. Vanessa stepped in first, leaving just enough space for him to understand that something between them had shifted. Ethan followed, jaw tight, as the doors closed on. The lobby where Claire Whitmore had been welcomed like the person he had spent years insisting she could never become. Downstairs, the city waited in wet concrete and gray afternoon light. Cameras from a financial news crew were setting up near the bank entrance for an unrelated interview. their lenses pointed toward the revolving doors. Ethan saw them and straightened by instinct, smoothing his expression into the old confident mask. But as he stepped outside, one of his partners walked past him without stopping, already speaking into his phone. Vanessa moved ahead to the curb, distant under her white umbrella. And for one cold second, Ethan stood alone beneath the bank's brass awning, surrounded by people, traffic, and snow beginning to fall, realizing that the story he had told about Claire had not destroyed her at all. It had only kept him from seeing who was standing across the room. Claire did not go home immediately. The car moved north through Manhattan, past wet crosswalks and office towers glazed with winter light, while Noah sat beside her in a respectful silence that asked for nothing. That was one of the reasons she trusted him. He did not rush to fill the air with congratulations. He understood that some victories arrived carrying the weight of old rooms, old voices, old versions of yourself that did not disappear simply because other people finally saw the truth. Claire watched snow dissolve against the window, each white fleck turning clear the moment it touched the glass. "You were very calm in there," Noah said at last. Claire's mouth curved faintly. "I learned from expensive mistakes." He almost smiled. "Ethan is likely to challenge the terms." "Of course he is." Her voice was soft, almost tired. "He has always believed consequences were negotiations." The car turned onto a quieter street lined with brownstones and bare sycamore trees. For a moment, the glass and brass of the bank fell away, and memory returned with the smell of lemon polish and cold marble from the penthouse she had once called home. She remembered mornings when Ethan left before sunrise, already speaking into his phone, already halfway inside a world where she was expected to be beautiful, agreeable, and invisible. She remembered standing barefoot in the kitchen with a stack of unopened financial statements, trying to understand why her name appeared beside accounts she had never opened. When she asked him, he had kissed her cheek and taken the envelopes from her hands. "You worry too much," he said. "I handle the complicated things." At the time, she mistook being protected for being excluded. That was the cruelty of it. It had worn the face of care. After the divorce, exclusion became freedom so slowly that she almost missed it. The first class she took was introductory accounting at a community college extension program, Tuesday and Thursday nights, under fluorescent lights that made everyone look exhausted. She was 30 years old, sitting between a restaurant manager and a retired postal worker, learning debits and credits with the concentration of someone learning to breathe again. No one there knew her as Mrs. Caldwell. No one cared what parties she used to attend or which family had stopped inviting her. When she got her first perfect score on a quiz, she cried in her car for 9 minutes. Not because the quiz mattered, but because competence felt like a door opening from the inside. The driver pulled up outside a narrow brick building in Tribeca with black-framed windows and a discreet brass plaque that read Whitmore Community Capital. Claire had chosen the office because it did not look impressive from the street. Inside, though, the work was alive. Architects moved between tables covered in neighborhood maps. Analysts reviewed renovation budgets. A wall of photographs showed old buildings before and after restoration, corner groceries reopened, apartments repaired, small businesses with lights back in their windows. This was what Ethan had never understood about money. He saw it as height, something to stand on so others had to look up. Claire had learned to see it as weight, something that could crush or support depending on whose hands held it. Her assistant, Marisol, looked up from the reception desk when Claire entered. "The Queen's tenant fund documents are ready for your signature," she said, then paused, reading. Claire's face with quiet accuracy. "Long morning." Claire removed her gloves. "Educational." Noah excused himself to review the revised offer in the conference room, leaving Claire alone for a moment beside the photograph wall. Her eyes found the first brownstone fund she had ever invested in, a weathered building that now housed 6 families instead of sitting vacant behind a chain-link fence. She touched the edge of the frame lightly. That was where her new life had begun, not with applause, not with revenge, but with one careful decision no one mocked because no one knew to look. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. For a second, she thought it would be Ethan. Instead, the screen showed an unknown number and a message from a financial reporter asking for comment on rumors surrounding Caldwell Harbor. Claire stared at it, then turned the phone face down on the table. Let the city talk. It had always talked. The difference was that now, for the first time, She did not need to answer to be believed. By late afternoon, the rumors had begun moving faster than the snow. Claire could feel them without reading a single headline, the way a person can sense thunder before the first sound reaches the glass. In the conference room at Whitmore Community Capital, Noah laid out the revised acquisition papers beside a fresh cup of coffee that had gone untouched. The numbers were clean. The offer was fair, firmer than before, but not reckless. Claire had built her company on discipline, not spite, and she refused to let Ethan turn even this into proof that she was emotional with money. Outside the black-framed windows, Tribeca softened under a pale winter dusting. Inside, the office carried the gentle hum of work that mattered. Keyboards, low conversations, the rustle of zoning maps, the quiet patience of people trying to repair what others had left behind. Marisol stepped into the doorway with a tablet held against her chest. "Claire," she said carefully, "Ethan Caldwell is downstairs. He says it is urgent." Noah looked up at once. "You do not have to see him." Claire already knew that. The old Claire would have needed someone to say it twice, to give her permission to protect herself. This Claire only looked at the papers in front of her, then at the window where her reflection appeared over the gray city. She did not see fear there. Not exactly. She saw history. "Send him to the small meeting room," she said. "Not this one." The distinction mattered. Ethan had taken enough seats at important tables. 5 minutes later, he entered the smaller room on the second floor, the one with plain oak chairs and photographs of restored storefronts on the wall. His suit was still immaculate, but the man inside it looked less certain than he had that morning. Snow clung to the shoulders of his coat. His hair, usually perfect, had been disturbed by the weather or by his hands. He glanced around the room with a faint, involuntary flicker of judgment, as if a place without marble could not possibly contain power. Then he saw Claire standing by the window, and the judgment failed him. "You would not take my calls," he said. "I did not receive any that required an answer." Her voice was even. That unsettled him more than anger would have. Ethan removed his gloves slowly, buying himself a second to assemble the man he preferred to be. Charming, reasonable, slightly wounded. "Claire, this has gotten out of hand. Whatever happened this morning, whatever Margaret said, it does not have to become ugly." She turned from the window. "It became ugly when you used my name as entertainment in a bank lobby." His jaw tightened. "I was surprised to see you there." "No," she said softly. "You were comfortable. There is a difference." The room held the sentence between them. For a moment, neither moved. Ethan looked at the photographs on the wall, the repaired buildings, the reopened shops, the families standing in front of doors painted blue, red, yellow. "So this is what you do now," he said, not quite mocking, not quite understanding. "You buy broken things." Claire's eyes did not leave his face. "I invest in things other people gave up on." The answer touched something he did not want touched. He looked away first. "Harbor can still work," he said. "The land is valuable. The permits are complicated, yes, but I can fix that. I just need time." There it was, the real reason beneath the injured pride. Not apology, not regret. Time. Always more time, more credit, more belief borrowed from someone else. Claire sat down and folded her hands on the table. "Then present a stronger plan to the bank." Ethan laughed once, quietly, without humor. "The bank is listening to you." "Because I came prepared." His face changed at that, a flash of the old impatience breaking through the polished surface. "You think taking a few classes and hiring Noah Bennett makes you understand my business?" Claire felt the old wound open its eye, but not its mouth. She did not flinch. "No," she said. "Losing years to a man who called control protection taught me to understand your business." Ethan went still. For the first time that day, shame crossed his face without finding a place to hide. Then his phone buzzed. He looked down, and whatever color remained in him faded. Claire did not ask. She did not need to. A second later, Marisol appeared at the door, composed but tense. "There are reporters outside," she said. "They are asking whether Whitmore Community Capital is acquiring Caldwell Harbor." Ethan closed his eyes. The city had found the story. Claire rose slowly, looking past him toward the hallway. Toward the office, she had built one quiet decision at a time. She had spent 5 years refusing to defend herself from whispers. Now the world was waiting for her to speak, and Ethan was finally the one afraid of what silence might cost. The reporters outside Whitmore Community Capital did not look like a crowd at first. They looked like weather gathering at the curb, dark coats, bright camera lights, umbrellas tilted against the snow. Through the second-floor window, Claire watched them arrange themselves beneath the bare sycamore trees, their breath showing white in the cold. A satellite van idled near the corner. Two financial bloggers stood shoulder to shoulder with local news crews, all of them drawn by the same scent. Money changing hands, a famous name weakening, a quiet woman becoming impossible to ignore. Behind her, Ethan had stopped pretending not to care. His phone kept vibrating in short, nervous bursts against the meeting table. Each time he glanced down, another part of his composure slipped. Investor, board member, public relations consultant, Vanessa. He did not answer any of them. Claire noticed that without seeming to look. Once, she had measured his moods by the way he handled his phone, the tightness of his thumb, the length of his silence after a call. Now those details belonged to a language she no longer needed to speak. Noah entered the room with Margaret Sloan on the line through his tablet, her voice clear, controlled, and distant. The bank will not comment publicly until the review period closes, Margaret said. However, Mr. Caldwell's team has been making calls. Someone is trying to frame this as a hostile move by your firm. Ethan looked up sharply. That is not what I said. Claire turned from the window. Is it not? He opened his mouth, then closed it. The old Ethan would have filled the room with explanation, confident that volume could be mistaken for truth. This Ethan had seen too many numbers today. Noah set the tablet on the table. There is also a rumor circulating that Claire is pursuing the acquisition out of personal resentment. Claire almost smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. When Ethan wanted power, it was ambition. When she held a boundary, it became bitterness. When he made decisions, they were strategic. When she made them, they were emotional. The script had survived the divorce. It had only changed costumes. Then we corrected, Ethan said quickly, seizing the word we as if it still belonged to him. Together, we release a statement saying there has been a misunderstanding. Claire looked at him across the small oak table. What misunderstanding? About us. His voice softened. About the past. The snow tapped lightly against the window, a sound so gentle it made the room feel colder. Claire remembered another winter, 6 years earlier, when Ethan had hosted a holiday dinner for investors in their penthouse. She had spent 2 days arranging flowers, seating cards, menus, the kind of invisible labor that made powerful men feel naturally surrounded by elegance. During dessert, one of the guests praised the evening, and Ethan raised his glass with a laugh. Claire has a gift for staying busy with the pretty things, he said. Everyone smiled. She had smiled too. Later, alone in the kitchen, surrounded by crystal glasses and half-melted candles, she had felt the sentence settle into her like dust. Pretty things. Not contracts. Not decisions. Not legacy. Decoration. Now he was asking her to decorate his collapse with forgiveness. Claire walked to the table and picked up the tablet. Margaret's face filled the screen, patient and unreadable. Mrs. Whitmore, Margaret said, how would you like to proceed? Ethan leaned forward. For one small second, hope made him look younger, almost like the man who had once stood beside Claire in a courthouse garden and promised partnership with sunlight in his hair. But hope built on old entitlement was still entitlement. Claire placed the tablet back down. Whitmore Community Capital will issue one statement, she said. No personal history. No accusations. No defense. Only the terms of our interest in preserving the harbor site, protecting contractors, and preventing community losses. Noah nodded faintly, approval without performance. Margaret made a note. Ethan's face tightened. That makes me look irresponsible. Claire met his eyes. No, your records do that. The words were not loud, but they ended the room. Ethan stood, then sat again, as if his body could not decide whether pride or panic was in charge. Claire, please, he said, and the word please landed awkwardly from a man who had always preferred commands dressed as concern. She studied him for a moment, not cruelly, but carefully, the way she studied balance sheets for hidden liabilities. I spent years being afraid that if people heard your version first, mine would never matter, she said. Today I realized something. I do not need to tell my version to make yours false. Outside, a reporter called her name from the sidewalk though the window was closed. The sound arrived muffled, distant, harmless. Claire turned to Noah. Prepare the statement. Then she looked back at Ethan. You should go through the side entrance. Not because I am protecting you, but because this office is not a stage for another performance. Ethan stared at her, and for the first time, there was no insult ready behind his teeth. Only the quiet recognition that she had not become powerful by learning to ruin him. She had become powerful by no longer needing to. Ethan left through the side entrance, but the city did not become kinder just because he avoided the cameras. The alley behind Whitmore Community Capital opened onto a narrow street slick with snow and old rain, where delivery trucks rumbled past and steam rose from a grate in pale, restless clouds. He stood there for a moment with his coat collar turned up, staring at the gray afternoon as if Manhattan itself had become a room that no longer recognized his name. His phone vibrated again. This time it was Vanessa. He answered because pride had nowhere else to stand. "Where are you?" she asked. There was noise behind her, the polished clatter of a hotel lobby or a restaurant bar. "Handling it," he said. The lie sounded tired even to him. Vanessa was quiet for a beat. "Your investors are calling me. People are asking whether I knew." "Knew what?" His voice sharpened, then faltered. "That everything was this fragile," she said. Fragile. He hated the word because it belonged too easily to the truth. He had built Caldwell Development like a glass tower, bright enough to impress from a distance, thin enough to tremble in bad weather. For years, he had told himself that confidence was structure, that expensive renderings could substitute for completed foundations, that charm could smooth over late payments and nervous contractors. Claire had once asked practical questions about contingency reserves, lien notices, and vendor delays. He had dismissed them as anxiety. Now every question she had asked was returning with interest. "Vanessa, listen to me," he said, lowering his voice as a bike messenger passed. "Claire is making this personal. She wants to humiliate me." Vanessa exhaled, and the sound carried more fatigue than affection. "No, Ethan. You humiliated yourself this morning. She just did not hide it for you." The line went dead before he could answer. He stared at the screen, seeing his own reflection ghosted over her name. Meanwhile, upstairs, Claire remained in the quiet pulse of her office. Noah drafted the public statement in careful language, every sentence clean enough to stand without drama. Whitmore Community Capital confirmed its interest in stabilizing the harbor site, protecting outstanding contractor obligations, and preserving long-term community value. There was no mention of Ethan's insult, no mention of divorce, no mention of the years he had spent turning her into a cautionary tale at dinner tables where she was not present to defend herself. That absence was the sharpest part. Claire stood beside Marisol's desk and read the final version once, twice, then nodded. "Release it." Marisol pressed the button, and the statement moved into the world with less sound than a door closing. Within minutes, phones began ringing. Not inside Claire, though. Inside her, something had gone very still. She walked to the back of the office where a small break room overlooked the alley. Below, through the frosted edge of the window, she saw Ethan alone by the curb, shoulders tense, phone lowered in his hand. For a moment, memory tried to soften him. She saw the young man he had been at 28, laughing under string lights at a Brooklyn rooftop party, ambitious and golden, speaking of buildings as if they were promises. She saw the first apartment they rented together, the cheap sofa, the grocery store flowers, the way he once listened when she spoke. Before control learned to call itself leadership. Before admiration became obedience. Before love became a room where only one person was allowed to grow. Noah appeared in the doorway behind her, but did not enter. "You saw him?" he asked. Claire nodded. "I used to think there would be a moment when he understood everything," she said. A perfect sentence. A look. Something that would give the past a shape I could finally put down. And now, she watched Ethan turn and disappear around the corner, swallowed by traffic, snow, and the city he had tried so hard to impress. "Now I think understanding is his work, not mine." Noah accepted that with a quiet tilt of his head. In the main office, the phones kept ringing, but they no longer sounded like intrusion. They sounded like proof of movement. Claire returned to the conference room and picked up the old leather folder. Its corners were worn soft from years of carrying papers that once frightened her. She opened it and removed the divorce settlement copy she had kept tucked in the back, not because she needed it, but because she had forgotten how to let go of evidence. The signature at the bottom looked like it belonged to a stranger. Claire folded the page once, then again, and placed it in the shred bin beside the door. Not angrily, Not ceremonially, simply because it was no longer useful. Outside, the snow thickened over Tribeca, covering awnings, fire escapes, and the tops of parked cars in a clean white hush. The city would talk tonight. It would invent motives, crown winners, pity losers, and turn private pain into public currency. Claire could not stop that. She no longer wanted to. She had work to finish, buildings to save, people to pay, and a life that did not require Ethan Caldwell's understanding to be real. The statement reached the evening news before the snow stopped falling. By 6 o'clock, the story had been stripped of its warmth and dressed in the sharp language of markets. Caldwell Harbor redevelopment faced restructuring. Whitmore Community Capital emerged as a leading bidder. Contractors could see overdue payments resolved within weeks. Community groups welcomed the possibility of revised plans. Ethan's name appeared in every headline, but not in the way he had spent years training the city to pronounce it. Claire's name appeared beside words like stabilization, confidence, and strongest offer. She read none of it until Marisol placed a printed summary on her desk with a hesitant smile. "You should see one sentence," Marisol said. Claire looked up from a contractor payment schedule. Only one. Only one. Claire took the paper. Near the bottom of the article, a quoted analyst described her firm as disciplined, unusually quiet, and well-positioned to turn a troubled luxury project into a long-term community asset. Disciplined. Claire let the word rest in her hand. Years ago, Ethan had called her unfocused because she remembered birthdays instead of bond yields. Soft because she cried when tenants in one of his buildings lost heat for 3 days in January. Impractical because she believed a project should serve the neighborhood around it, not simply rise above it. Now the same instincts had become strategy in someone else's vocabulary. She folded the paper and placed it beside her keyboard. "Thank you," she said. Marisol nodded and left her with the low glow of the desk lamp and the muffled hush of traffic outside. The office had emptied slowly, one coat and scarf at a time, until only Claire and Noah remained. He was in the conference room reviewing the final contractor list, sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms, silver-framed glasses catching the light. Through the glass wall, he looked less like a man rescuing her than a witness to what she had built without asking to be witnessed. Claire appreciated that more than flowers, more than praise, more than any dramatic promise. Her phone lit up. This time, Ethan's name filled the screen. She watched it ring until it stopped. A voicemail followed. She did not play it right away. Instead, she stood, put on her coat, and walked to the small balcony at the back of the office, where the city opened in fragments between buildings. The snow had turned Manhattan soft at the edges. Fire escapes wore white lines. Rooftop vents breathed into the dark. Somewhere below, a car horn sounded twice and vanished into the evening. Claire pressed play. Ethan's voice came through lower than usual, stripped of audience and polish. "Claire, it is me. I know you probably do not want to hear from me." A long pause. For once, he did not seem to know how to continue. "I did not realize how much you had done, how much you understood. I told people things because it was easier than admitting I was wrong about you." The cold touched Claire's face, clean and bracing. She waited for the apology to become a request, as it always had before. It did. "If there is any way we can talk before the bank finalizes this, I would appreciate it. Not as enemies, just as two people who used to know each other." The message ended. Claire lowered the phone. Two people who used to know each other. There was a sadness in that phrase, but not enough truth. Ethan had known the version of her that made his life easier. He had known her patience, her manners, her ability to forgive quickly so dinner could continue. He had known the surface of her, then called it the whole woman. Behind her, the balcony door opened softly. Noah stepped out, buttoning his coat against the cold. "Everything all right?" Claire looked at the dark screen of her phone. "He wants to talk." Noah did not ask what she would do. That was why she answered. "Tomorrow," she said. "At the bank. With Margaret present. No private rooms. No old habits." Noah's eyes held steady respect. "That sounds wise." Claire looked out over the city, where lights burned behind thousands of windows, each one holding a life no headline could summarize. "No," she said quietly. "It sounds learned." The next morning would bring another room, another table, another chance for Ethan to mistake access for forgiveness. But tonight, Claire stood above the snow-covered street with her coat wrapped tight around her, feeling neither victorious nor wounded, only awake. And somewhere deep inside that wakefulness, the woman Ethan once reduced to a rumor finally stopped waiting for the world to correct him. She had corrected the balance herself. The next morning, Caldwell Meridian Bank looked untouched by the story it had helped set in motion. Its brass doors gleamed beneath a pale winter sun. Its lobby smelled of coffee and polished wood, and the private elevators opened with the same soft chime that had cut through Ethan's laughter the day before. Claire arrived at 9 o'clock precisely, wearing a charcoal coat over a cream silk blouse, her hair pinned low, her old leather folder held beneath one arm. Noah walked beside her, not too close, not too far, carrying a slim case of documents. Reporters waited across the street behind a thin line of security, their cameras lifting when she stepped from the car, but Claire did not pause. She had spent too many years being turned into a public object. Today, she would be a private decision. Margaret Sloan met her on the upper floor with a formal handshake and eyes that carried a quieter respect than words could hold. "Mr. Caldwell is already here," Margaret said. "Conference room 3, as requested. Glass walls. Full notes. Counsel present." Claire nodded. Every boundary she had asked for had been honored. That alone steadied something inside her. In marriage, she had learned how quickly a room could become unsafe without a single raised voice. A chair placed too close. A door closed too firmly. A conversation framed as kindness before it became control. Today, the room would not belong to memory. It would belong to terms. Ethan stood when she entered. He looked as if he had slept little. The perfect suit remained, but the shine had gone from it. His tie was a fraction too tight, his eyes shadowed, his confidence assembled rather than natural. Across from him sat his attorney, a compact woman with silver hair and a face built for difficult negotiations. Vanessa was not there. Claire noticed, then released the fact. "Thank you for coming," Ethan said. It was strange to hear gratitude from him without an audience. Claire took her seat beside Noah. Margaret sat at the head of the table, opened her file, and began. The agenda was simple. Review revised acquisition terms, discuss contractor payment prioritization, confirm whether Caldwell Development could present an alternative capital plan within 48 hours. The words were dry, but beneath them moved the real conversation. Ethan wanted rescue without surrender. Claire wanted accountability without theater. For the first 20 minutes, they spoke through documents. Numbers replaced old wounds. Collateral values. Insurance gaps. Escrow releases. Outstanding invoices. Claire asked 3 questions about subcontractors in Queens and 2 about the small businesses that had signed leases in anticipation of the harbor project opening on schedule. Ethan's attorney answered most of them. Ethan watched Claire as if each question revised his memory of her. Finally, when Margaret called for a brief pause, he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I owe you an apology." The room did not move, but something in it tightened. Claire looked at him. "For what?" The question seemed to surprise him. He blinked once. "For yesterday." Claire waited. Ethan glanced at the glass wall, at the executives beyond it, at Noah, at Margaret. The apology had arrived, but it was still looking for the smallest possible shape. "For what I said in the lobby," he continued. "It was unnecessary." Claire folded her hands on the table. "Unnecessary is when someone forgets an umbrella. What you said was deliberate." A faint flush touched his face. His attorney looked down at her notes. Noah remained still. Ethan swallowed, and for the first time, the performance cracked in a way that did not feel useful to him. "I was angry," he said. "I was embarrassed. Seeing you there, like that, knowing you had become someone I did not understand." He stopped, searching for the cleaner sentence and failing to find it. "I made you smaller in my mind because I could not stand the idea that you had grown beyond me." Claire felt the words enter her without undoing anything. That was the surprise. She had once imagined an admission from him would open the locked room inside her and let the past walk out. Instead, it simply landed on the table between them, late but real, not enough to change the terms, yet enough to name the damage correctly. "You did not make me smaller," she said. "You only taught me what kind of rooms I never wanted to beg my way into again." Ethan's eyes lowered. Margaret closed the pause with professional grace. "Shall we return to the revised offer?" Claire picked up her pen. Outside the glass, the bank moved in silence and money. Inside, the old marriage finally became what it should have been years ago, a closed file, a documented liability, and no longer the measure of her worth. The revised offer did not punish Ethan, and that was what unsettled him most. It was firm, exacting, and stripped of all the soft privileges he had once confused with respect. Whitmore Community Capital would acquire a controlling portion of the harbor debt at a risk-adjusted price. Contractor invoices under $250,000 would be paid first from a dedicated escrow account. The luxury tower plan would be paused for community review. Affordable units would be increased. Local businesses with signed leases would receive rent protection for the first year. Caldwell Development could remain involved only under independent oversight, with Ethan removed from unilateral control of project funds. Margaret read the terms in her measured voice while sunlight slid across the conference table like a blade made of glass. Ethan's attorney listened without objection, which told him more than any argument could have. The terms were not sentimental. They were defensible. They were the kind of terms a court, a bank, and the public could understand. Claire had not come to destroy him. She had come prepared to outlast him. "This would effectively make me a figurehead," Ethan said at last. His voice was controlled, but his fingers had gone white around the pen. Claire looked at the project renderings on the screen, all blue glass and rooftop gardens, a dream sold before its foundation had earned trust. "No," she said. "It would make the project accountable to more than your confidence." His jaw shifted. Once, that sentence would have become an argument that lasted all evening, circling until she apologized for the tone he had forced from her. But here, under glass walls and recorded minutes, there was nowhere for distortion to hide. Margaret turned to the next page. "There is one more matter." Ethan's attorney straightened. Noah slid a document forward but did not speak. Claire felt the quiet pressure of the moment settle around her shoulders. Not heavy, exactly, but solemn. Margaret continued. "During due diligence, we identified a legacy account created during Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell's marriage, associated with early harbor planning fees and consulting distributions. Mrs. Whitmore was listed as a beneficiary on that account. Those funds were never disclosed during the divorce proceedings." Ethan's face went still, not confused. Still, Claire saw the difference, and in that difference, the last fragile thread of doubt inside her broke cleanly. For years, she had wondered whether he had simply underestimated her, whether his cruelty had been carelessness wearing ambition's mask. But the silence in his eyes told another story. He had known. Maybe not every detail. Maybe not every dollar. But enough. He had known there were doors in their marriage he had locked from the inside. "How much?" Claire asked, though her voice sounded far away to her own ears. Noah answered gently. "With growth and distributions, approximately $3.8 million. The number did not make Claire feel rich. It made her feel cold. She thought of the apartment with the hissing radiator. The nights she compared grocery prices under fluorescent lights. The winter coat she wore for 4 seasons because replacing it felt irresponsible. She thought of Ethan's lawyers calling the settlement generous while undisclosed money slept behind a wall with her name on it. Ethan looked at her then, really looked, perhaps understanding that this was worse than the lobby, worse than the headlines, worse than losing control of Harbor. This was not a failed investment. This was a record of his character. "Claire," he said, "I can explain." She believed that he could. Men like Ethan could always explain. They had explanations for omissions, for timing, for technicalities, for why the truth had been too complicated to share with the person harmed by its absence. Claire did not want one anymore. Margaret placed another document on the table. "The bank is prepared to cooperate with any legal review Mrs. Whitmore chooses to pursue." The room waited for anger. It did not get it. Claire picked up the page and read the account number, the dates, the signature trail. Her hand stayed steady. That steadiness felt like the truest thing she owned. When she finally looked up, Ethan seemed smaller, not because he had lost money, but because the story he had told about himself had run out of architecture. "I am not going to discuss this with you privately," she said. "Not now? Not ever." His shoulders lowered by a fraction. "What are you going to do?" Claire closed the folder. "Exactly what I learned to do after you left," she said. "Read everything, document everything, and let the proper people handle the rest." Outside the conference room, the private banking floor moved on in quiet. Luxury. Inside, Ethan Caldwell sat before the woman he had called incapable and watched her choose procedure over revenge, law over spectacle, and dignity over the satisfaction of seeing him beg. The discovery of the legacy account changed the temperature of the room. Not outwardly. Caldwell Meridian Bank remained as composed as ever, with its muted carpet, glass walls, and distant view of Manhattan shining under winter light. But something had shifted beneath the polished surface. Ethan no longer looked like a man fighting for a company. He looked like a man watching every locked drawer in his life open one by one. Claire sat across from him with the document in front of her, the account number printed in clean black ink, the dates aligned in perfect columns. $3.8 million. The figure should have roared. Instead, it hummed quietly in the space between them, a low electrical sound only she seemed to hear. She thought of all the times she had apologized for needing less than what had already been hers. She thought of turning down dinners with friends because the subway fare and a salad felt indulgent that month. She thought of the winter she worked through a fever rather than miss a consulting deadline for a client who paid late. Not because she had been helpless, because someone had benefited from her believing she was. Margaret offered to pause the meeting. Claire declined. A pause would have suggested she was breaking. She was not breaking. She was absorbing information, and there was a difference. Noah quietly placed a legal pad beside her, already marked with next steps: forensic review, disclosure demand, amended divorce filing, preservation notice. The words were crisp, procedural, almost merciful in their order. Procedure had become one of Claire's favorite forms of peace. It did not ask her to scream. It simply asked her to be precise. Ethan leaned back in his chair, then forward again, trapped between apology and strategy. I did not personally move those funds, he said. The account was handled through advisors. My father's office managed early distributions. Claire looked at him for a long moment. Did you know it existed? His silence answered before his mouth did. I knew there were old structures, he said carefully. I did not know the final amount. That was not my question. Margaret lowered her eyes to the file. Ethan's attorney touched his sleeve once, warning him without speaking. He ignored her. Perhaps pride, even injured pride, still needed to make one last mistake. You have to understand what things were like then, he said. The company was under pressure. The divorce was complicated. Everyone was trying to protect assets. Claire almost laughed, but the sound never left her chest. Protect assets. Such a clean phrase for hiding truth from the person who had trusted him most. She remembered signing papers with a pen provided by his attorney, her hand shaking so badly she had gripped the table underneath. She remembered Ethan refusing to look at her that day. At the time, she thought it was guilt. Now she understood it may have been calculation. I was not an asset, she said. Ethan blinked, and for once, there was no immediate reply. Claire turned to Noah. File the preservation notice today. Request a full accounting from every entity tied to the harbor planning phase and the marital estate. If there are additional disclosures required, proceed through the court. Noah nodded. Understood. Ethan's attorney spoke then, professional and quick. We would prefer to resolve this without unnecessary escalation. Claire looked at her, not unkindly. Then necessary escalation will be enough. The attorney's pen stopped moving. Margaret's expression did not change, but something like approval passed through her stillness. Ethan stared at Claire as if he were seeing the final version of a woman he had met only in drafts. Not louder, not crueler, not dressed in revenge. Simply exact. Claire, he said, and this time her name sounded less like a claim than a confession. She stood, gathering the documents into her folder. The acquisition terms remain open until Friday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time, she said. The legal review is separate. Do not confuse my professionalism with forgiveness. The sentence settled over the table with quiet finality. Then she turned and walked out. Noah beside her, leaving Margaret to close the meeting in the calm language institutions use when private empires become public records. In the lobby, the same junior banker from the day before stood near the reception desk. When Claire passed, he straightened and gave her a respectful nod, not nervous this time, not startled, just aware. She stepped into the elevator and watched the doors reflect her face back to her. For years, she had feared what might happen if every hidden thing came to light. Now, as the elevator descended through brass and stone, she realized the light did not destroy her. It only showed her where the exits had been all along. By Friday afternoon, the snow had melted from the sidewalks and left Manhattan washed clean, as if the city itself had decided to stop carrying yesterday's dirt. Claire arrived at Whitmore Community Capital just before 3 o'clock, 2 hours before the acquisition deadline, with a paper cup of coffee in one hand and the old leather folder in the other. The office was busy but calm. Marisol was coordinating contractor payment confirmations. Noah was on a call with the bank's legal team. Architects had spread revised harbor plans across the conference table, replacing one glass tower with mixed-income apartments, a public courtyard, ground-floor shops, and a child-care center facing the water. The renderings were less glamorous than Ethan's original vision, but they looked lived in. They looked possible. Claire stood over them for a long moment, tracing the edge of the waterfront park with her eyes. This was what survival had taught her. Not every broken thing needed to be discarded. Some things only needed to be taken out of the hands that kept breaking them. At 4:37, Margaret Sloan called. Her voice was composed, but Claire could hear the faint satisfaction beneath it. Caldwell Development had accepted the terms. Ethan had signed away unilateral control of the harbor project. The bank had approved the debt transfer. The contractor escrow would open Monday morning. The legal review of the undisclosed legacy account would proceed separately, with full cooperation from the bank. Claire thanked Margaret, ended the call, and stood very still. Around her, the office waited. Noah looked at her through the glass wall. Marisol paused with one hand over her keyboard. No one cheered yet. They knew her well enough to let the moment arrive at its own pace. Claire looked down at the folder she had carried for years, the cracked leather softened by all the versions of herself it had outlived. Then she smiled, not brightly, not for display, but with the quiet astonishment of someone who had reached a shore she once could not see. "It is done," she said. The room released its breath. Applause rose gently at first, then warmer, filling the office without becoming spectacle. Claire accepted it with a small nod, her eyes stinging in a way that no longer felt like weakness. An hour later, after the staff had returned to work and the first contractor payment schedule had been finalized, she stepped outside alone. The evening was cold but clear, the sky over Tribeca fading from silver to blue. Across the street, a small television in a cafe window played the financial news on mute. Ethan's photograph appeared beside a headline about restructuring. Then Claire's, taken from some old business profile she barely remembered. The screen made them look like opponents in a story too simple to hold the truth. Claire watched for a few seconds, then turned away. Let strangers flatten it if they needed to. She knew the shape of it. She knew the years of fear, study, restraint, and discipline that never made headlines. Her phone buzzed once. A message from an unknown number appeared. "Claire, I am sorry." No request followed. No explanation. No attempt to pull her back into the old room of his need. Just 3 words, late and insufficient, but perhaps finally honest. She read them once, then placed the phone in her coat pocket without replying. Some doors did not need to be slammed. Some only needed to remain closed. Noah found her at the curb a few minutes later, carrying her gloves. "You left these upstairs," he said. She took them with a grateful smile. For a moment, they stood side by side while the city moved around them in headlights, footsteps, and the soft rush of evening traffic. "What now?" he asked. Claire looked toward the downtown skyline, where windows were beginning to glow one by one. 5 years earlier, she would have thought freedom meant proving Ethan wrong in a room full of people. Now she understood it was quieter than that. Freedom was paying the contractors first. Freedom was knowing what every page said before signing it. Freedom was no longer mistaking someone else's disbelief for a limit. "Now," she said, slipping on her gloves, "we build something that lasts." Noah smiled, and together they walked back toward the office lights. Behind them, the bank towers shone above the avenue, cold and golden, but Claire did not look back. The woman Ethan had tried to reduce to a rumor had become the signature everyone was waiting for. She had not raised her voice. She had not begged to be believed. She had let the truth gather interest in silence, and when it finally matured, the whole room learned her name.